Everybody, I know we have not met in quite some time. I just want to call us to order. If anyone is audio or videotaping, they need to acknowledge it at this time. We are just missing Peter at the moment. And we'll jump right into our presentation from EP, Environmental Partners. Let's hope this works. Yeah, if you guys want to move it, if it's easier for you to see, because it's behind you, Bill.
Perfect.
Right.
It looks perfect.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay on Zoom?
Yes.
Yay! Hi everybody, I'm Kate Rosa. I'm project manager with Environmental Partners, and I'm joined today by Helen Gordon, principal at Environmental Partners. And we're here today to present to the committee a plan on an update on the recommended plan, or phase 3 of our CWMP. So the goals for today's session are to give you a refresher on what we've done to date, what we've been able to walk through and complete, the phases that are left to be completed. We're going to walk through a brief overview of the regulatory changes that have been made in the last year and the CWMP impact as it pertains to on-site wastewater treatment and nitrogen-sensitive areas. And then I'm going to present what we have so far for a draft recommended plan and talk about some of the changes that might have been made to an alternative. And then we are going to get into a little bit more about the costs and timing of next steps, and really looking for this committee's feedback on a couple of decision points that we've reached as your engineer, as your essentially pulling together this plan. We can go one of two ways, and we would want public's feedback, specifically through this committee, to help us have insight as to whether the town would be open to one choice or the other.
Okay. And guys, I know you're new, so if you have any questions, because I don't expect you to know all of this information, just ask.
And I'll do my best to do pause points to make sure that I don't go too far without doing a temperature check, if that works. All right, I'm actually going to just walk over to move the little Zoom box just so that you guys can see the images.
May I ask if this presentation will be available in a printed form after this?
It always is, and so we provide it, we always put it up on the website too.
Very well. And in the website address?
Yes. So what I will typically do is, I apologize for not distributing this before the meeting. That's
Fine,
typically
but
my goal.
Give us the website address. I think
Oh,
we'll
absolutely.
have
And it'll be posted through the committee and through the CWMP page, but I will make sure that the web address is shared once it gets posted as well.
Thank you.
So Marlene will be helping me to post the PDF of the slides afterwards. So, refresher, what is a CWMP, or Comprehensive Wastewater Management Plan? It is a town-wide water quality assessment that incorporated the 2019 Local Comprehensive Plan developed by the town of Bourne. And the goal is to align growth and development goals with water quality goals over the next 20 years of planning horizon. So we completed the first phase, the needs assessment, in 2021. We completed the alternatives analysis with this committee in 2022. And then we are here in what is now a little bit delayed, 2023. I'll get back to that. We're doing our recommended plan phase 3 starting in 2024. So the goal is, you'll see phase 4 is the regulatory review. We're also going to be, the goal is to have that achieved this year as well. So you'll see that orange box at the bottom reads that Mass DEP proposed a draft Title V and watershed permit regulations in late 2022 that affected some of the timeline for the CWMP in 2023. Essentially, the final regulations were posted in July of 2023 that finally defined the nitrogen-sensitive areas for natural resources and made a couple of different definition changes to the best available nitrogen-reducing technology, or the on-site nitrogen removal systems. So we have that all incorporated into what we're moving towards. So the alternatives analysis was in line with that. The goal moving forward is we have a couple of options for the town to determine whether they'd like to pursue a watershed permit, how that will affect the CWMP phasing, or to go with the Title V regulation default timeline, and I'll talk through that in more detail. But I'm going to pause there to see if anyone needs more background on any of the completed phases.
I'm assuming that that's all going to be online or in other documentation.
So just for people to know, on the front page of the Bourne website, you know, on the left, there's buttons with different topics.
Right.
There's a button that is the Comprehensive Wastewater Management Plan, and under that are all the presentations, all the drafts, everything that we've been doing so far. So there's a lot of material that you can refer back to for the needs assessment. And then for the alternatives analysis, it's all right there under that, on that button.
Great, thank you.
So as a refresher, where did we last leave off with this committee? Where was the last point that we had been discussing with this committee? The alternatives analysis. We spent a lot of time reviewing all the different technology alternatives that are available in the town's toolkit to look into for removal of nitrogen in the watersheds, as well as to help with mitigating nitrogen once it's in the environment. So essentially, the goal of the alternatives analysis was to remove nitrogen based on the goals we set in our needs assessment. So in Bourne, we have 2 watersheds which have total maximum daily limits for nitrogen. And those 2 watersheds are listed in the table at the right as Megansit-Squatique Harbor and Finney's Harbor, which have a removal goal associated with these documents. To give a little background, there were Massachusetts Estuaries Program studies done several years ago for both of these watersheds, which did a embayment study and linked sources of nitrogen loading, whether it's from homes with wastewater, agricultural sources, stormwater runoff, and they determined what the total loading to the watershed needs to be reduced to stop negative impacts on the environment. So that means habitat, that means water quality conditions. And so that is what we, for this plan, are using as the basis for what we can, it's the total controllable load, what we as humans are putting into the watershed that needs to be removed. Yep, go ahead.
There's a concern that I have about how long ago was this particular study made?
That's a great concern. Like, we had that same concern when we were going through the needs assessment and through the alternatives analysis. Unfortunately, the way that the MEP program was funded and the way that they did studies at the time, we are using the best available information to come up with our plan moving forward. So for the loading that was done at the time, we have just that snapshot in time of the loading. But what we've done is calculated, based on water use, what the new approximate loading is. So if you go to the needs assessment, we did talk more about how we looked at what the TMDL loading had said for loads. We corroborated that, so to speak, with our calculations of what the nitrogen load is based on where people live in Bourne, what properties have been developed since the MEP study was done.
Okay, that is a clear exposition of process. What was the approximate time that you used as a base time of when this date was? Was it 10 years ago? No. 20 years ago?
So the needs assessment was using 5 years past data from 2021. So we were looking at 2016 through 2021 water use data. Okay. And the studies themselves were done, and I'm not going to remember the exact dates for which ones off the top of my head. One of them was completed in 2020, and the other one was completed a few years before. So I'd have to check on the dates for when.
No, that's okay, just,
The TMDLs
my
were done.
thought is that if you come in with a baseline of what you're, putting this on, the data acquisition is important, but it's also important to know, some type of understanding of when it began, what are you basing it on? And I keep thinking about the density of a dynamic community like Bourne is adding, different elements all the time. So, did you have some sense in this data collection, for example, was the density of single-family homes, for example, which is, which I think is the main criteria, and let's say in commercial activities that were at risk for wastewater management, was there any thought given to what increase had happened during that time or decrease?
Yep. So I'm going to encourage you to go back to our needs assessment document, which had the parcel density breakdown,
Okay.
including the assumptions from the 2019 local comprehensive plan. So in terms of going, we essentially were using the basis of where the town would like to go for future development or for future uses of the town based on that local comprehensive plan. So we looked at an updated snapshot of in 2021, what is the parcel basis? What are we looking at for water usage? What are we looking at for types of development parcel density, i.e. how many housing units are on one parcel, and kind of did that analysis during the needs assessment. So you can get some more data crosscuts by going through that literature. And if there's something that is not answered through that, we're happy to answer that if you get into more detail as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So the two TMDL watersheds, Magansett, Squatigue, and Finney's Harbor, have the total controllable load that we're removing based on the TMDL. For the other watersheds in Bourne, we have Buttermilk Bay, Pecasset Harbor, Pecasset River that are nitrogen impaired watersheds, which means we know that we have data showing through water quality monitoring sources like the Buzzards Bay Coalition and other nonprofit partners in the region that we work with, that there's a clear concern for nitrogen loading in that embayment. But what that means is we don't have the TMDL document for those watersheds. And the reasoning behind that is the Massachusetts Estuary Program, which was funded over 15, 20 years ago, has been slowly getting back to resetting that system of who gets assessed next. So essentially in conversations that we've had through the CWMP process with Mass DEP, there was a pause on the MEP program. They are picking it up as they have a new watershed modeling group that will be looking to prioritize and identify watersheds that communities have interest in studying. So the town has expressed that Buttermilk Bay is one of those watersheds that is of interest and importance to be studied next. That's not to say that Pecasset Harbor and Pecasset River are not as important. It was just we're going to do one, then the next, then the next. But for all three of those watersheds, we planned for a 25% reduction across all three of those watersheds to start. Keith.
Okay, so the Buzzards Bay Coalition is just about completed with the TMDL for Pecasset Harbor. I don't have it with me, but within the last month, I had an email with Rachel and
Corinne?
thank you, Corin. Oh, and they're, I can send that to you if I can find it. They're estimating it'll be complete in the first half of this year. So I went through it with them because we're concerned about it because in Pecasset, we're kind of like behind the eight ball. So they agreed that a timeline we could use to get it, because it has to go to the DEP, then it has to go to the EPA. And they feel that in the middle to the end of 2026, that process should be completed. I'm gonna find that and send it to you.
That would be wonderful. Thank you, Keith.
And before we leave Buttermilk Bay, since Buttermilk Bay, is on the, would be the south side of the Cohasset Narrows? Anyway, I've always observed that the part of Buttermilk Bay that is in Bourne has a beach that you look at when you're on that bridge. And where in Wareham, you've got a junkyard on one side, and you've got a paved, or essentially, a paved situation to the water itself. Have you any feedback from Wareham as far as they're managing the contribution to that, to Buttermilk Bay pollution? Is this a conversation that's begun?
That's a great question. For the start, because Buttermilk Bay has not been assessed by MEP, there hasn't been a full watershed loading analysis to determine, based on land area, the composition of who's sending what to the watershed in terms of stormwater or controllable load like wastewater. So that would absolutely be something to be looked at when doing a watershed study. For the focus of this report, it is Bourne's specifically comprehensive wastewater management plan. So the goal in looking at these 3 nitrogen impaired watersheds that don't have an official TMDL yet was to look at a baseline reduction of 25% to start. It's not to finish, to start. The goal of implementing a total maximum, or the goal in implementing a CWMP is that it will be managed by the community over time. So even though we are setting the plan as the recommended plan in the year 2024, in 5 years, the plan will be looked at by the community to see what still fits or what new information you might have. And that could be a good time or opportunity to look at shared opportunities with Wareham as a first adaptive management check on where they can help contribute to nitrogen removal.
So I take it there's been no contact with Wareham with regard to this issue?
No, there has not, to my knowledge.
I have a, so someplace in some of these reports, the Megansett-Squatigue Harbor percentage that's Bourne responsibility is listed, I want to say 30% or something. And then there's also that same sort of number for Buttermilk Bay, right? Just part of it, a lot of that responsibility be Wareham's responsibility as opposed to Bourne's responsibility. So identifying how much of Buttermilk Bay is Bourne's responsibility. And I don't know whether, like the Jefferson Shores, whether that north part of Buttermilk Bay, is that Seward in Wareham? Is that a Seward area of Wareham? I think it might be. So that would be an interesting thing to find out because, I mean, if this is based on the total numbers for Buttermilk Bay, I don't know what the numbers represent, so.
So this is for Bourne's allocation of land area loading in Buttermilk Bay. So again, go back to in our needs assessment, just to kind of back up, we have the land area that is encompassing the watershed area. For Buttermilk Bay, we do not have the background linked embayment study through MEP for Buttermilk Bay when we did the needs assessment.
Right.
So we did the approximation based on land area of contribution. So the majority of upstream, so to speak, land area, according to the delineations of how the watershed is drawn, is what was estimated for
A lot of that's
Bourne.
Wareham or Plymouth.
Correct.
Yeah, it's not.
But then the loading that we calculated as the baseline was based on actual water use data in the Buttermilk Bay area of Bourne. So we didn't incorporate other communities when we were looking at the snapshot in time of what the wastewater load is. We were only looking at in town, what do we know we have, who lives where are our controllable loads coming from?
I don't know if I'm jumping ahead, but have we worked at all with Falmouth, with the Megansett-Squatigue Harbor? Because I think you just said that they have much more than we do. Are we working together on this?
We've had meetings with them.
Good,
We
okay.
have had meetings with
So
them.
that would sort of tell you where we'll go with Wareham too.
Because, and Falmouth is actually planning to do a watershed permit, because they're planning on sewering.
Right.
But, so they don't want to force people to IA systems if they're going to plan on sewering. So, that was a conversation we had. But we also had the conversation with them that the current numbers at Megantic, Squetig monitoring locations are meeting the TMDL with nothing. So it's like a complex situation.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
Kate, so when our CWMP goes to the state for approval, do we need to know those Plymouth and Wareham numbers? Or we can just submit Bourne and not worry about the rest of them?
Not to my knowledge. So with Bourne being able to put forth the estimates for for all three of these nitrogen impaired watersheds that haven't been studied yet,
Okay.
this is what we're putting forth as the 25% reduction, because we know there's a nitrogen concern, but we haven't been given a load number yet. So this is where we as a community Bourne will be starting with removals. That may be something that is part of the comment period when we submit it to MEPA and to the Cape Cod Commission as part of a comprehensive review. I don't know, did you want to add? Here, come to a mic.
So just to summarize then, the actual report will say that the recommended plan addresses a 25% reduction for the portion of the watershed that Bourne is contributing to Buttermilk Bay, based on the land use that you're contributing to it.
Can you do the same thing for a watershed permit, or does the watershed permit have to be a shared watershed permit?
So, the watershed permit would have to be shared, and you'd have to figure out the percentages that you were going to be doing.
Yeah.
The other way too that I've a community, say Bourne pursues a watershed permit, so a few things would need to happen. Bourne would still have to be able to do the study showing runoff types from Buttermilk Bay. So essentially working with, let's assume Mass DEP, the first thing the watershed modeling department can do is model Buttermilk Bay. They give you your exact loadings, and they know Plymouth has this percent and Wareham has this percent. The town of Bourne can still move forward with a watershed plan without participation or feedback from Plymouth or Wareham if you are in the position to do so, and you would be responsible for your load removal. What I think Mass DEP has been encouraging, or at least as the regulations have it, they also are open to coordinated intermunicipal watershed permit agreements. So it's the feature of, we might be able to tackle this thing if we work together approach, but each community is still responsible for meeting their own nitrogen removal benchmarks. So that's where the conversation that you just mentioned,
Yeah,
MJ,
and
about
we did,
Falmouth
especially
comes
for the
in.
Buttermilk Bay portion of it, when the Board of Sewer Commissioners met with the Wareham Board of Sewer Commissioners, we talked about a coordinated effort, especially if they're doing a plant expansion, that the Buttermilk Bay portion, for which we're talking about sewering, and we haven't gotten to that yet, but that might make sense to coordinate that with Wareham as part of the Wareham plant and the sewer system, and they're open to that conversation. And we did have that conversation with the sewer commissioners in Wareham.
You mentioned Plymouth. Is that the Manamet River? It's part of that watershed?
I'm not sure, to be honest. It's
Okay,
just
what is the
sharing
connection of Plymouth to a watershed?
to Buttermilk Bay watershed. They have land area that contributes a small portion into Buttermilk Bay.
Yeah, the watershed, you can look at the watershed maps
Yeah.
in the needs assessment.
Yes.
Yeah, they're all in there,
Yes.
what the 7 watersheds are.
Correct, thank you. So, the last 2 watersheds on that table, because we are looking at a town-wide, include Buzzards Bay, as in the direct discharge to the entire Buzzards Bay, and the Cape Cod Canal, which is considered its own watershed, and it has its own direct discharge areas. While we did assess the approximate wastewater load these two watersheds have, they are not nitrogen impaired according to the water quality community data information that we had available, again, because neither of these two watersheds as a whole to direct discharge have been studied. Pieces, of course, are contributing to Buttermilk Bay. For example, Finney's Harbor, all of these other watersheds listed, we know contribute to Buzzards Bay as a whole. So in looking at, when I want to be very specific, when I say we mentioned Buzzards Bay and Cape Cod Canal, it's where users or people in Bourne contribute directly to those watersheds. It does not go through an embayment before it gets there. So those water bodies themselves are not going, they were not moved forward into the alternatives analysis, and we're not looking at solutions for those for this CWMP. Again, the CWMP is the start, not the end of the conversation. As Bourne moves through its CWMP implementation, those areas can be managed as you move through your CWMP plan completion. Areas can be added, areas can be adjusted or included as part of the BMP areas, if that makes sense. So for the alternatives analysis, we drafted that and reviewed alternatives with this committee. We pulled together an evaluation matrix. We pulled together evaluation criteria by the committee to assess or narrow down from the hundreds of technologies what are the 20 or so that we can reasonably assess, and then come down to town-wide tools to start with for CWMP implementation. So that was where we landed in 2022 with the alternatives analysis. So I'm going to go through some slides that will have images as well as tables that are the findings from the alternatives analysis with new lines that I've added to it, and this might be hard to see. So again, when you get the presentations, you'll be able to see where the lines are written in. Oh, sorry, I had one more before I go through the images. The pause of the alternatives analysis was, we completed the alternatives analysis just in time for the public comment period for the Title V regulation changes and the new watershed permit regulation proposed in July of 2023. So in December of 2022, we essentially paused the CWMP until those regulations came out and we knew what the impacts would be. In July of 2023, those regulations were promulgated, they went into effect, and we met with the select board and with town staff to modify our plan of study accordingly. Essentially, the alternatives that we had proposed in 2022 are compliant with those regulation changes, and the one item that is now open to the community is investigating or use of a watershed permit, and I'll get into that a little bit more when I break down the schedule of what we're looking at. So since the fall, we've been able to restart and develop these draft recommended plans. Essentially, the goal of the recommended plan is to put time and money towards the how are we actually going to do this widespread implementation across 5 watersheds with hundreds, nay, thousands of new systems that will need to be brought online. So before I move on, any regulatory change questions? All right. So as a refresher, this is Maganzet-Squatique Harbor with the blue outlines. The green hatch shows the area in the alternatives analysis that we identified as general use, innovative, and alternative on-site systems. And the pink lines are now the implementation radius. So essentially we're breaking down where do we start and where do we go. We'll start from the coastline and move inland for implementation as one approach to implementing IA systems across the watershed. To do the table reminder, we're looking for implementation of between 280 and just under 360 parcels. We can say 300 just to round in the middle there, to remove the estimated load removal of 500 to 600 kilograms of nitrogen per year. We also are looking at townwide stormwater best management practice updates, which we have a maximum that we're allowed to remove from each watershed of no more than 20%, so we just add that in. And we're able to meet the removal requirement of 600 kilograms of nitrogen per year. So with the alternatives as we have it proposed, we're able to remove the amount of nitrogen required under the TMDL limit.
So on that prior map, if something inside a pink circle is not done, or so it's the things that are inside the pink circles that are the later things that are not included in your calculation, and the things that are
All
out?
of them are. All of the green hatched areas are included in
The 300
the
and,
300 or so IA systems, correct. It's the phasing of it, so looking at how many can we do per year or where do we go first, but ultimately the goal for this watershed is still to do general use IA systems watershed wide. It's basically, if it has a residential use in that parcel and doesn't have an IA system, it's going to need to have one, or the best available nitrogen reducing technology of the homeowner's choice.
I guess you'll have to forgive me for my ignorance here, but when you looked at that range of, the slide that you had for the parcel arrangement, 285 to 357 number of parcels, do those individual parcels have a common range, or is the, I guess I don't understand why you wouldn't have used, one figure for number of parcels. Why is there a range of parcels?
So the range of parcels was related to, I believe that I have to double check why we had the specific range. So for example, the title is listed as residential, general use IA systems.
Okay, there are 8,500 residential units in Bourne.
Oh, yes. And so in this watershed, we would need to convert at least 285 up to 357.
do we know how many parcels there are?
Thank you.
Off the top of my head, I don't, but I can look into that. Does that make more sense?
That makes a little bit more sense. You're talking about what you have to look at rather than there's a range of so many parcels that may or may not be involved.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Kate, on that map, there's, on the right-hand side, is that a road? What is that on the far right?
Yes.
What is
and
that?
that is the roadway.
What, is that,
Which one?
28.
that's 28? So we're asking people on the base to, what's over there? Isn't that the base?
The symbology is highlighted moving across the town boundary, but no, the goal is to only include parcels within Bourne. So that
Well, that is
symbology can
Bourne.
be
This is
updated.
Bourne.
That is Bourne, that's the problem.
Within Bourne that has residential ability to be controlled. It's Bourne land within Bourne's jurisdiction. Correct me if I'm wrong.
So, are any of those parcels on the other side of 28?
No, so this symbology I can correct to show that the parcels that we counted, that range in this table, are only parcels that are within Bourne's jurisdiction.
Controllable.
Correct.
So can you put a column in this for the total number of parcels in the watershed?
Sure.
So that we'll know that there's this many parcels and these are the ones that we're talking about?
Yes.
I think that'll help clarify.
Yes.
So you're really not counting anybody to the right of 28?
Correct. I have to
These-
double check those larger parcels. There might be one that's a developable, but there are water quality areas in that vicinity. So the layer was placed on top, but what I can do is make it more clear so you can see exactly which parcels are included.
Because, I don't know if you're aware, but there's talk about putting housing up in that area. Where, will come into play with this, so we need to know.
That is an update.
Kate, you've referred to IAs that are general use.
Yes.
So the pilot or the provisional are not included.
they would be better than the general use IA that we have assumed. So as your engineer, I wanted to, or when we had gone through the alternatives analysis, it was before Mass DEP had changed the requirement for their definition of best available nitrogen reducing technology. And Mass DEP as of right now has 3 different categories of IA systems. General use being 19 milligrams per liter or less of nitrogen in the effluent. What we have are technologies that can do better, remove more nitrogen than that in the provisional or pilot permit status, as you just mentioned, Keith. When we did the alternatives analysis, we were looking at what would the worst case be, which is putting in a general use system which can treat to 19 milligrams per liter as a starting point. Individuals or even the community as a whole can always pick a more efficient technology, and they may need to have less systems installed in order to meet the nitrogen removal requirement.
So,
But we looked at worst case when it came to a loading perspective.
so I have tried to get this information myself for a while now. The last time Mass DEP updated their list was March of 2022. And I get a stonewall answer every time I ask. I actually went to Lakeville and stopped in and said, is there any idea when this is going to be changed? Nope, nobody knows. You don't have any inside info there, do you?
I wish I did. I wish I
What
did.
about our friends up at the base at the center there? They're working on all of these different systems. When
Oh,
they-
you're talking about Bryant? Yeah, but I'm talking about what if you,
I know,
the
but-
state has a 37-page list updated in March of 2022. That's all, that's my question. When are you gonna, because some of these, pilot systems or
Yes.
provisional systems have moved forward.
Right.
So, it's just,
If they met the requirements, well, they should be updated.
you would think, I mean, that's kind of
Because,
like common sense.
like you said, the more people that do the better systems closer to the water, the less people who are further away from the water have to do this.
That's right.
When you talk to people about alternative systems, I know that the county is running continual programs of testing,
Right.
and they may have some information. Did you talk to them?
So, the rule is that to move from one level to the other, there's a minimum number of systems that have to be installed and monitored long enough to have data. So that's, what they're doing up at the base is experimental. What the state is doing, or should be doing, is taking systems that are installed, that are getting monitored, using that data to make more systems available. Because right now, if you are going to get only general use, that list is stagnant. It's, I don't know how many of the 37 pages are that. But there are systems coming online, and what would help with that is with the cost. Because the more systems that are available, the more competition there is between the systems, and they're not able to raise their prices, through the roof.
Gee, I ought to write this down. I never heard this before. The problem is, we have representatives that are supposed to represent our interests. Were you able to talk to any of our alleged representatives to see if they could put some pressure on them?
I did not do that. I kind of went on a campaign
No,
on my own.
Congratulations for doing that.
It
But
didn't work, but I tried it.
but at the same time, I think more of us have to do or engage in that kind of activities. Because I used to get feedback from the state saying, unless we could show evidence that people were interested in it, they weren't interested in doing anything for us on embayments and on, introduced pollution and different type, in different types of exposure on our coast. So, and for a long time, there was a guy that basically didn't want to do anything because he was going to retire in 2 years, and he didn't want to get involved in anything going on, which was told to me by somebody else. But anyway, yeah, congratulations for doing that.
Well, the
Interest of time, we gotta go.
Yeah, long
through-
thing, yeah.
Let's
Sorry,
kind
that
of
was
see what
my-
they've got in this presentation.
that was a tangent. I'm sorry.
The only insight I have is, we'll cross this bridge. I have some insight, it's a thought, but it's not anything from Mass DEP. I have a guesstimate, and we'll go there.
Great,
Okay.
thank you.
So Magansett-Squatigue, the goal was about 300 parcels to meet general use IA loading. Based on parcels that we have estimated, we're going to be able to meet that. So Finney's Harbor TMDL, this one also remains unchanged from the alternatives analysis. It's quite widespread when it comes to general use IA, and actually this image cuts off the parcels that are along that Route 28. So I need to look into some of these the general use IA is more widespread than what's shown. See how there's a straight line almost coming up? I'll review these and modify them when I send out the slides so they're up to date. But essentially, widespread general use IA implementation. And we applied the same radius. It was a 0.5 mile radius, 0.5 mile radius, and other radiuses for implementation. So Finney's Harbor is a much greater number of general use IA implementation. Again, the range is given for at least 1,133 parcels and up to 1,235 parcels that would be converted to a general use IA system. We're incorporating that 20% stormwater BMP removal for the grand total of around 2,400 to 2,600 kilograms of nitrogen per year removed from these alternatives. So we are able to meet the goal. The goal is 1,706 kilograms of nitrogen per year. So there's flexibility within the number of parcels for us to meet that goal. There is room built in for implementation plans.
What is the percentage of that goal? What percentage of removal is that?
For Phineas Harbor.
Yeah.
100% for the total controllable load. So we're looking at, again, the update of, okay, the MEP study was done, what's changed since the study was done, what's been developed at a higher density, using water usage to estimate actual loads, and then looking at the removal from the TMDL.
The reason I'm asking is, wasn't there something in the Title V original regulations about removing 75% of the
That's what I thought
nitrogen?
too.
So the 75% item comes into play under the watershed permit, I believe, but we can check the regulations.
Okay.
The watershed permit option, and we'll get into that when we talk
Okay.
about the timing, would allow for you to have 20 years to meet a 75% removal goal.
Okay.
So when we did the alternatives analysis, we were looking to meet the TMDL removal goals. So it would be the full TMDL 100% removal
Okay.
over 20 years.
We're about to update our private well regulations at the Board of Health. And one of the questions I have is that we're estimating about 2,500 dwelling units in Bourne that have private well use. The rest are, on the public water system. In these areas, was there any significant, when you're measuring the water usage, I assume you're adding up water department data?
Correct.
Okay. Was there any indication of any significant density of private well use in any of these areas that might diminish the amount of, let's say, of water usage information?
When we assessed water usage, we only used the baseline of water use data from the water districts. And because we don't have actual water use data from private well users, we estimated that even a private well user would use the same average amount that a residential parcel in the water district would use.
Okay,
Does
so
that
you
make
were-
sense?
You were taking that into consideration?
Correct.
Okay,
If you
great.
were on private well, we were still looking at where are parcels developed, even if they are not a billed user of the water department, what can we expect that they would be loading into their property because we know it's occupied.
Okay, thank you.
So Finney's Harbor, no change. TMDL met at 100% of the TMDL removal, sticking with the general use IA. Buttermilk Bay is where there is a change from the alternatives analysis moving forward to the recommended plan. So in 2022, we identified a core sewer area, which are these blue parcels highlighted in the center of the image. It won't work on the TV, so I'm just going to walk over. Sorry for those in the room. That loop right there. Oh, thank you, Helen. And that core sewer area was identified based on its proximity to the existing Buzzards Bay wastewater treatment plant, or also known as the Queen Sewell wastewater treatment plant, the Bourne owned and operated wastewater plant. The other areas, the bright green areas, are the existing sewer area for reference, and then the hatched bright green areas north of and more included in Buttermilk Bay are the areas that we identified for residential, general use IA alternatives. So essentially, if you weren't close to where you could be connected to sewer, then you're going to use general use IA, with the exception of a core sewer area that we named Sewer Alternative 1, which was about 330 parcels. In 2022, we had estimated about 375 parcels that would be converted from Title V to general use IA systems. In order to meet that 25% nitrogen load goal, so not a TMDL goal, but a nitrogen removal goal of around 1,400 kilograms of nitrogen per year. So what has changed? Between 2022 and 2023, we were communicating with the Board of Sewer Commissioners, and that there have been updates to the flow allocations such that flow to the Buzzards Bay wastewater treatment plant has been allocated by the Board of Sewer Commissioners, which means that even though that flow may not be the actual, let me just pause there. So as of right now today, there is no capacity available to tie in additional sewer expansion other than all of the applicants that have already secured their flow allocation. So what that means is the collection system is full because the flow allocation has been prioritized within the existing collection system area. So to add a core sewer area for the sole purpose of nitrogen removal, so this wouldn't be in alignment with an economic development goal, so to speak, this would be converting residential parcels for nitrogen removal purposes, would require significant expansion of the existing Buzzards Bay, the town-owned and operated treatment plant, as well as revisiting their loading restrictions through their groundwater discharge permit. So for scale, that plant is permitted and able to accommodate 100,000 gallons per day of flow, which has all been allocated. Essentially, we would look to double that size in order to accommodate that core sewer area, Sewer Alternative 1. So for the recommended plan, we have pivoted to say, well, why don't we look at the best available nitrogen reducing technologies? We're looking at those pilot or provisional stages to perhaps consider that area as a targeted area for a pilot or provisional IA system pilot. And it's something where, for Buttermilk Bay, this is something that can be adaptively managed over time because Buttermilk Bay does not have a TMDL as of this moment today, nor is it expected to get one in 2024. But this is something that when the community of Bourne is able to complete and get its TMDL, there's the opportunity to review whether the core sewer area is option of choice, or if continuing to use those pilot and provisional, those better technologies, is more suited to the community. The other feature is this is the time where potentially revisiting those core regional partnerships may become more important as the town moves into adaptively managing the CWMP in Buttermilk Bay. So this is something where when we went through our needs assessment, or better yet, when we went through our alternatives assessment, we had strong feedback from Bourne community members that revisiting an outfall was not going to be an option for an alternative, so we didn't investigate that further. Down the road, there might be opportunities to partner with other wastewater treatment plants, whatever that might look like, and that opportunity might need to be revisited in some format. I'm not saying that's the only option. I'm saying we may have to revisit an option that we had previously taken off the table. Does that make sense?
There have been different reports about how much the existing sewage treatment facilities have been actually getting in real time right now. These other areas or other potential additions, are they existing or are they just in a queue to be added?
I think it depends on,
The most of the allocation is in a queue. So what we're actually using now doesn't include developments that have requested an allocation and are in the planning stages. And there are quite a few of those, major ones.
Okay, so they're in queue.
Right, they've asked for an allocation, they've paid for an allocation,
Gotcha.
and they're in design.
Okay,
So we can't allocate it to someone else.
thank you.
so that is what has changed in Buttermilk Bay. So the image now shows that same blue area that was once identified as the core sewer needs area has now been targeted as a less than 19 milligrams per liter effluent on-site area target, which puts that removal at around 819 kilograms of nitrogen per year. So it's the same parcel count because we just changed the loading of that area. And it is a, as you will see, lower removal amount because we're not putting it to a more advanced treatment, wastewater treatment plant. However, it is still a removal that when added together with the already identified general use IA systems and stormwater, will be able to meet the initial 25% nitrogen removal goal for Buttermilk Bay. So running a centralized pilot of EIA systems, which would, for my definition purposes, is either pilot or provisional stage, depending on the risk acceptability of the town from a policy setting perspective. That would be something that could be investigated as part of replacing in the recommended plan the sewer area for now. Thoughts on this before I go through Pecasset, Harbor, and River?
Is the reason that you're not considering residential EIA systems in Phineas Harbor and Megantic-Squatigue is that you can meet the load with the general use, but you can't meet the load in this with the general use, so you have to go, you don't go to sewering, you go to the EIA.
Correct. In this circumstance, we
It's taken only 2 years to figure that out.
we looked at the core sewer area, which would remove, our assumption was 10 milligrams per liter or better,
Okay.
which we actually know there are some pilot and provisional technologies that are saying they can consistently meet 10 milligrams per liter or better. But essentially, as soon as we had included the loading as low as we could go, we then had to kind of go back up the loading ladder, so to speak, to figure out what's the next best option that's not centralized wastewater treatment that would still be able to help the town of Bourne meet their loading while not needing to affect their existing wastewater treatment plant capacity and discharge permit. So again, it can be revisited later depending
So
on
is this
what Bourne
EIA at the
decides.
10 milligrams per liter, is that what you're saying?
For this loading, I went up one step to go to 15 milligrams per liter
There are a
as the
bunch of
assumed
15.
effluent.
Right.
Correct.
So I get confused with all this. So if I put in a provisional in my house and it removes 15%. So if it doesn't ever get to general use, is that okay? So like in 10 years, they're gonna say to me, hey, dude, you gotta have general use, you gotta take it out and put another one in.
That's a good question, and it would have to be decided by your policymakers whether that is Bourne's policy or not. So I don't mean to give you a non-answer. It truly is going to be dependent on your health department and the Board of Health bylaws for how Bourne will continue to use pilot and provisional systems. As of right now, you can apply to install a general pilot or provisional use system in the town of Bourne, and it's reviewed as a case-by-case basis, essentially.
Okay.
And part of the problem in going to an absolute innovative alternative system is the volatility of what she's talking about.
Right.
Okay, and so we're waiting for, let's say, for some support evidence that there is a absolute baseline, and we've recently set a priority of effort as far as reviewing all the regulations, and that's certainly part of it. Watch this station. Hopefully we'll get done with this.
Okay.
So does this mean if as technology improves and we can go to a 10 rather than a 19 removal, does that mean that then this person that's across the street, he doesn't have to do it because this one's already taken out the 10? Does that make sense?
What you're saying is if your home is on the quarter-mile radius line,
Yep.
and you upgrade to have a 10 mil, I'm going to use 15 because that was the model number I used. So 15 milligram per liter effluent value system, would your neighbor then have to still upgrade their system? Most likely. The reason being that you won't necessarily see the effect immediately
Right.
downstream due to travel time through the groundwater, through the groundwater, because and when we get into the modeling feature of it, being able to use the best available nitrogen reducing technology will benefit the ecosystem. It will benefit the watershed because if individual users are removing more nitrogen, then it will ultimately benefit the watershed as a whole. From the standpoint of how we are advising you set up your recommended plan would be based on targeting certain areas, watershed areas, and doing an implementation strategy so you're doing incremental change. Something the town could consider is the risk benefit of a waiting period to wait for your solution to show positive results before moving forward with the next phase of implementation. And that benefit will really only come into play for the town if you choose to implement a watershed permit,
Right.
because that is where you have the town altogether approach. The town is who becomes the permittee. The town is who has to meet water quality goals across the watershed, and you have 20 years to meet 75% removal over that time frame.
May I ask a quick question?
Yes, please.
Thank you. About a year ago, when we were discussing, this kind of follows up on Mary Jane's question about McGinson Harbor and Feast Harbor. Close to the water, there were a lot of, at least the water table was too high for a lot of innovative alternative solutions. Has that changed? Is there better solutions out there that have been incorporated into higher water table locations?
So for the alternative areas that we've identified, we were looking at the total number it would take to meet the load removal. What we have not done at this point to date is a parcel by parcel, essentially design basis analysis for individual parcels near the watershed. I know that the USGS is getting more accurate with what we're seeing as both groundwater rise, which is an effect of climate change, as well as understanding where seasonal high groundwater might be in the water table. So as part of the implementation phase, that would be something where there might be parcels close to the water that cannot be upgraded, that they might need to join a cluster system with a conjoining parcel who's up the hill and share their disposal field, essentially creating, I am going to have my wastewater on site, but I need to have it be discharged in uphill from where I currently am because I am underwater. That type of partnership, essentially. So these numbers are based on the best case. All parcels are able to be, we were assuming that all parcels are able to be sited with a general use IA system. When getting into implementation, there may be parcels that are specifically identified that cannot be, and then revisiting cluster system for outside of the high groundwater table might need to be visited, or looking at changing the number of general use systems and implementing more enhanced or pilot or provisional systems to accommodate. Does that make sense?
It does, it just, it will be asked.
Yeah.
Sure.
And actually, Chris, I think that you're gonna run into more problems like that in Pecasset, like around Circuit Avenue, than you are in Meganson-Squatigue. In Meganson-Squatigue, it's pretty, there's a pretty hot, the water, the land rises pretty rapidly, yeah, so. But
And-
Pecasset would definitely, where our low-lying roads are around Circuit Ave, it's definitely gonna be an issue.
And especially, that's actually, I'm going to go right into Pecasset Harbor specifically, and then we'll go to Pecasset River. These are areas where, again, we have that widespread general use IA alternative, but Buttermilk Bay, Pecasset Harbor, and Pecasset River don't have TMDLs yet. I know that we now have an update. There's some progress being made towards one. But this is where the timing advantage will come into play for how the town can adaptively manage these watersheds, which we know are nitrogen impaired, but we actually will likely need some pilot and provisional technologies to be able to help us meet our shared watershed goal because of how climate change is affecting the coastline and because of groundwater rise in areas where people will have to be switching to potentially a tight tank, but their neighbor might be able to update to a general use IA or best available nitrogen reducing technology. And that's why the implementation phase of these 3 nitrogen impaired non-TMDL harbors are scheduled out after the first 5 years of plan implementation to kind of allow for that space and technologies to catch up and to see what other solutions might be available, especially the more we know about how fast sea level's rising and therefore affecting groundwater rise.
One other question that comes to my mind is that I think of the Sagamore Lens, for example, and I think that incorporates the whole town of Bourne, right?
Correct.
Okay, it's like a saucer, okay, and that this discharge from on-site systems is essentially ending up in this lens. Okay, and I know that the nitrogen removal is to reduce the effect on all of that, but do we know at what point that we should be concerned about saturation in individual parts of the lens? You know, are there, for example, as we look at this lens, pockets where you could have accumulation? And I don't know how you would look into that. That was a question that we always looked at at other venues with regard to planning. So, is there some way of understanding what the effect is of any attack that, let's say, that causes a deterioration on the lens, on its normal ability to use dilution, let's say, to use dilution to, let's say, to diffuse or spread out the effect of this loading. Is this something that is part of your analysis?
So, are you, in regards to nitrogen specifically as the nutrient of, or the contaminant of concern? So, the good news is that there have been extensive studies by USGS, so not on this local level, around the water quality and protection of the Sagamore lens of the Cape Cod Aquifer. And in Title V existing regulations, and now part of new regulations, Title V has always mandated that Zone 2 wellhead zones are protected from nitrogen by requiring them to have nitrogen removing technologies already, or the creation of a watershed protection districts, which a lot of communities in Massachusetts have used, and Bourne already exercises that. So for example, here in Massachusetts, we have community groundwater drinking supply sources. So south of the canal, it's going to be the Bourne Water District. North of the canal is Sagamore and Buzzards Bay Water Districts. That data was able to indicate whether they have a water quality issue existing, so whether they have nitrate concerns in drinking water. And we can go back to the data from our 2021 needs assessment to kind of gauge at the time what we had received from the water districts for concern areas. But essentially the existing Title V protections already mandate that any on-site systems implemented after 1995 within those areas would have to be assessed for a nitrogen removal component. So Bourne already has just under, it's about 700, over 700, don't quote me on the exact number, existing IA systems, I believe. I have to double check it's in the hundreds. And a lot of those systems are because of protecting public water supply sources. It doesn't necessarily include the same level of measurement for private wellheads, which is a concern, but that's where the Title V setbacks for individual installation come in. So for this project specifically, the goal was to look at nitrogen removal from all areas of the community, not just in the Zone 2 areas, but we also do have some mapping that will show where the Zone 2s overlap with the watersheds that we're talking about, if that helps.
Yeah, it does.
So for Pecasset Harbor, I'm going to go into the numbers again for this, and then we'll zip through because I know we're running short on time. Again, these slides will be available to you. I'm going to correct the imaging on some of the images to kind of correct why there were parcels being overlaid. But then these will be sent out so you can review them in more detail, have more time. For Pecasset Harbor, no changes from the alternatives analysis. So we were looking at just under 1,500 parcels, so widespread general use IA removal, maxing out a couple of commercial IA general use systems, good candidates that are not currently IA system holders according to our record, but would be a good candidate for implementing that as a change to their on-site system, maxing out the stormwater BMP benefit. We're within about 100 kilograms of nitrogen per year of that nitrogen removal goal, which is 25% removal across Pecasset Harbor. And then Pecasset River, again, the alternative did not change. Some of the parcels have popped out based on uses, so they will never be developable, which is why they're not highlighted. Open space and other type of uses, water protection district. But again, 650 parcels is what it will take to be able to meet the nitrogen removal goal of about 1,200 kilograms of nitrogen per year. So we're looking to have 650 parcels converted to the general use IA systems, removing just under 1,200. Adding the stormwater BMP bumps you up to meeting that goal. So where we need your committee's feedback and where we'd like your input specifically is around our implementation plan. So the goal, or at least the way we have it drafted, because again, we're your engineer, I'm going to try to put things together in a plan that makes sense based on funding, based on timeline, and reasonably how many systems you could actually install with your current health department, with your current resources, or making recommendations to expand that department to accommodate your installations. Right now, we have about 300 installations per year across the TMDL watersheds to start. So the first 5 years of the CWMP would be TMDL focused, using general use IA installations. Next, the goal would be to implement across the non-TMDL watersheds, which are nitrogen impaired, so Buttermilk Bay, Pecasset Harbor, Pecasset River, And the goal for those is not quite as quickly as the TMDLs. It's about 170 conversions per year for the remaining 15 years. And part of that option would allow for the town to revisit the Buttermilk Bay sewer shed, whether it's core sewer area or being able to adopt a regional partnership that allows for more centralized flow. So the feedback that we would like your help with is in understanding and gauging public interest in the watershed permit versus Title V default implementation. So the watershed permit, we just started talking about, it's a 20-year commitment by the town, which has essentially, it becomes a permit that the town has to follow, and they have reporting requirements to Mass DEP. And the benchmarks that the town would have to meet are set by the town. So what you would use is looking at the sentinel stations, looking at your implementation plan, and being able to meet your 300 per year benchmark to start, or whatever that installation quota would need to be for the TMDL watersheds. That would allow for more time and the potential for the town to look into town ownership and therefore town funding of the capital installation of systems, with the setup of essentially a septic utility through the sewer department in collaboration with the health department to be able to oversee the systems for compliance. That would be the most town engaged version, and it would require capital as well as O&M costs from users to be able to support essentially the creation of a septic utility. The other option that is currently the default, so if the town chooses no option or no action towards the watershed permit, the default Title V regulation change that went into effect this past July is that new construction is going to be required to have a best available nitrogen reducing technology on-site system starting this July 2024. And that was an extension because that requirement was previously going to go into effect in January of this year, but at the last second, DEP extended it, which, Keith, back to your earlier point, is why I'm thinking that they needed more time perhaps to give us an updated technology list is one of my working theories, and it's purely a working theory. It is not based on any answers I've received from Mass DEP.
Well, it would make sense if they've extended it by 6 months, then they can use that time to.
That's what
Say
I
what
would
the best
desire.
available
That's
technology
logic, Kate.
is.
Does that always work?
I'm doing my best. That was a thought that I had. So that might be one reason, and if not, then it still gives folks at least another 6 years, so a full year with a new requirement to be able to accommodate that. Then for existing homes, so this is even if you do not change the size of your home, which is typically when you are triggering a Title V review, or if you're not selling your home, which is also when you trigger a Title V inspection, you are just living in your home, which is in a nitrogen sensitive area as defined as a natural resource NSA. So that means if you are in a TMDL watershed in Bourne, you must begin to comply with having a nitrogen reducing technology beginning 2030 or by 2030.
So is that new?
So that is part of the new Title V regulation change where they added the definition of a natural resource nitrogen sensitive area, which requires that even existing homes in that area will need to upgrade their system from a Title V or less, like cesspool or lower, to a best available nitrogen reducing technology.
And you have until 2030 to do that?
Yeah,
20
5 years, the 2 years plus the 5 years.
Correct.
I'm
So
The 2 years, the initial 2 years from 2024 to 2026 is their 2 years. And then the 5 year.
So it would be
2025.
July of 2031. I apologize, so I'll correct
Okay.
that too. So
Okay.
it's by July 2031.
So can we go back to your septic, what was it called? A septic?
Utility.
Yes.
So I very much, the branding I am borrowing from the county. They recently, Barnstable County is doing a pilot for a responsible management entity. And the responsible management entity is a voluntary program that EPA rolled out in the early 2000s to try to help communities manage their decentralized treatment plant, which means it's everywhere. Barnstable County applied for and received an EPA grant to do a regional-based responsible management entity, or to use existing data that they already collect from a lot of communities on the Cape, and to gauge interest and collect data in what running a regional, county-based septic utility program would look like. So they've recently rebranded their program to be a septic utility program, a SUP, if you will. And I personally think that phrasing is more relatable than an RME, because it's, you know what a utility is, you know what a utility does, and to create that same association for a septic system, I'm really liking. So I will give David Iorio Izzo all due credit for the name in the rebranding.
So I again, simple. So who owns the system?
So the other item that we'd like your feedback on is where Bourne might gauge on that scale of who owns, who maintains, who pays, who's responsible for managing the on-site system. So the EPA came up with this scale, and it's 5 models of increasing involvement. So right now the default is a Model 1, or homeowner education model. The next step is an operation model. I would say most of Massachusetts that has Title V systems is like a 1.5, where we have town health departments that are responsible for keeping all of their own inspection data, for going out and maintaining Title V compliance. And some communities will do that in a more hands-on way. They have more records. Some communities do not. So that's at the one end of the spectrum, where there's kind of the least day-to-day involvement with owning and operating a septic system. The pilot and provisional technologies are what we would call a permit-operated system. Those are a Model 3 on the scale, which means that if you, Keith, were to install on your property a provisional system tomorrow, that provisional system has a permit from the state that the manufacturer of that system is required to pass on to you as the homeowner, and also for you to understand what they are going to be operating for you for the first 12 quarters, 3 years of your installation time. So for the first 3 years, the manufacturer of your system, the provisional system, would have to operate your system for you. And if they're able to meet the results they say they can meet in their permit, then they can pack up and leave, and then they hand you the keys, and it's on you to maintain the system for the rest of that life. But that's a Model 3, where it depends on what the system is and what their permit is as the manufacturer, responsibility in handing the keys over to the homeowner. Models 4 and 5 are where we get into the town taking on a more active role. Model 4 is when the town operates and maintains but does not own the system. So this is one where the town would inspect the system, get operational data. They might issue a notice of compliance to the homeowner that they need to do something to their system to be able to fix it. Depending on the level of maintenance definition the town is willing to take on, this is a risk factor measurement for the town. They may be able to do some maintenance, like operate a pump out, or be able to reset an electrical component if your system has an electrical component, but they would ultimately not necessarily be responsible for paying for any of those items, and they would likely not, the town would not be then held responsible for any failure to meet the performance, which is where Model 5 comes in, which is a fully town-owned, they own the septic system, the IA on-site system on your property. They have an easement to access that for sampling, for maintenance, for oversight, and they could potentially therefore own the infrastructure, be able to put forth funding to maintain it. So I will give you a case study to help give like a train of thought for where this has happened, because it's new to the Cape and we're looking to develop this. The good news is people across the country have been doing this since about the 80s. This example is Otter Tail Water Management District in Minnesota, which implemented on a much smaller scale, mind you, because it was a lake region in 1984, a sanitary sewer district. So they established a district area that then allowed them to collect funds against property taxes to be able to create a functioning septic utility, and they have about just under 2,000 systems. So it's a much different scale than what Bourne would be implementing, because we're looking at a much higher implementation across the alternatives as we have proposed. But what Otter Tail Water Management District has are two different like membership options. They have an active, where the system is maintained by the district, and then they have passive, where it's just monitored. So that would be kind of splitting between a Model 2 and a Model 4 RME scale type system. And then you have passive, again, that's the administration data collection only. They assess fees, again, they range from under $100 up to $450, and they will charge based on the type of system you have installed, so how complicated your actual on-site system is, and whether they manage costs of maintenance for it or not.
That area is in Duluth, Minnesota, is it?
I'm not sure how close it would be.
Well, I guess I'm trying to find out if it's a recreational area, or is it an urban area, or is it, something different than that?
It's more akin to like the Lakes region of New Hampshire, where you might have some seasonal residents and some full-time residents, some resorts, but it is not a dense urban district like a Lake Tahoe example.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Well, Lake Tahoe, yeah.
I know it's
is
more
a smaller
widespread. They
area,
have
yeah,
some
yeah.
urban.
And they went through a whole bunch of cleaning up the lake.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, years ago.
In terms of scale, that's what I was trying to reference.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is a comparison.
Mm-hmm.
I would have a bias towards going with the county, since I used to be part of the county, I'm an alum. And the other part is, the first thought that comes to mind, when you had 170 conversions per year, I'm thinking in terms of let's say a 250-day year of work, and that would mean that they would be doing at least 1.5 a day, throughout that period, which would mean the next, you may be going into cost, the first thought that comes to my mind is that you now have, instead of $250,000 for labor costs for the Board of Health, you now have something more.
A lot.
So wouldn't this?
Although I have no responsibility for budgets in this, and no say over it, that does occur to me that is a cost to me as a, let's say, as a Bourne resident and taxpayer.
So for Bourne to set up a septic utility, that's way bigger than just the CWMP. I mean, now you need a whole new department, you need the bylaws, that's a gigantic ask for a town that doesn't run to do anything.
So are there any numbers in this?
So I wanted to give the scale for what the individual capital cost is, which is applicable to essentially now all of the alternatives. I have cost information for the sewer expansion, which will be included in the report, just as so you can have it number. But I wanted to be clear that we don't have room to do it, so I didn't want to show that presentation of that data because it's not being included in the implementation plan. So the reason why we need feedback for what is our time scale and what options would you like to see for management, because they have huge funding implications, essentially, is where I'm going with this. So for everyone with their calculators, just pick your watershed that you live in and you can get an idea of capital cost scale for a system, for an individual general use IA system. We collected quotes from all 5 of the general use vendors that are permitted in Massachusetts. We applied an estimate of what
Excuse me,
construction would be.
How many are permitted?
5 general use nitrogen removing technologies in the state. As of the March 2022 list, 5.
Wow.
5. How many of them are on Cape Cod?
Oh, where they're based? I don't know that off the top of my head. I apologize.
Some of them are on Nantucket, actually.
Of course.
Kathy, were you going to ask a
Yes.
question?
What I'm missing here is the alternative systems that are not what we're talking about at all. Like the urine diverting toilets and the composting toilets and all the things that they're still working on and that remove, I'd say 100% of the nitrogen and cost far less. Is it just too early to put them into this calculation?
So I will urge you to step back to our alternatives analysis and where that report had led us to, because we did walk through essentially the pros and cons of all the different technologies. Some of the technologies that you're mentioning will fall into the non-traditional category,
Right.
which means that they may require additional modeling if you want to put it forth as part of the first pass. So the other opportunity, or the other approach that we took when we were doing our alternatives analysis, was the general use on-site IA systems are considered a conventional technology under Mass DEP. That was also a new change that happened while we were doing our CWMP, which means that this is the backup. If you are interested in implementing pilot projects or experiment areas with willing homeowners or a willing neighborhood that would be willing to share data to help you as a community make a decision about a technology, that option is always available to you. The harder part is for the first implementation plan, where we had decided after the alternatives analysis was to move forth with the conventional technologies, the already, like Mass DEP is determined that they can remove 19, that they
Right.
discharge nitrogen at 19 milligrams per liter.
I understand that, but we've learned a lot since we last talked. I mean, Falmouth is coming up with this whole pilot program that is funded to several $1 million. I'm actually going to a meeting tonight about it down in Falmouth, and if they can show that they remove 100% of the nitrogen and it costs, I don't know, a couple $1,000 as opposed to, $50,000, I think that's something we have to consider, and I think we need to put that in there, that we're open to options, because technology keeps, advancing. So,
I will write that down.
Also, if I could comment about the RME, I think one of the things you were asking about is the management of this process and the cost associated with it, but you also mentioned something about countywide. Is there a potential the SCP or the sub-program or whatever it might be would be potentially a county utility entity?
That is, so right now, the pilot RME, I have to double check when the end date of that is, but Bourne is a regional participant in that, so the data from Bourne's existing IA systems is being entered in as some baseline information that the county's using in setting up their utility. They, at this time, don't have any budgetary information that we can use from a planning perspective for how much it will cost and when they will bill and what they will require of a participating community, because they are still building that out. So that is also another, that pilot was started during our CWMP process, which means that we may have to put together an implementation plan that assumes Bourne's responsible for X, Y, or Z of an RME model, and that the goal is to, again, one option for the town could be, do you want to prioritize using the county's system, or would you be in control of your own system? And where that decision point comes back to is, does the town of Bourne want to pursue a watershed permit or not? And a part of a watershed permit plan would be how you plan to oversee your decentralized systems, which is where that decision point would be for the community. Would you want to wait for the regional one, or if you plan to opt into a watershed permit, then you would need to make that decision in addition to deciding county. or
So
not.
I think we've reviewed, we spent a lot of time reviewing stuff that we already had kind of decided on, as opposed to going into phase 3, which is determining what our next course of action is and what it's gonna cost us. So if you take the cost for individual capital cost estimate, and I'm just gonna use the high side, $50,000, okay? Because, 5 years from now, it's probably gonna be 100. But if you're gonna do 300 systems a year for 5 years, right? That's 1,500 systems times $50,000 a system is $75 million of capital costs in 5 years. And these are the numbers those are the numbers that we have to start putting down. And if we start talking about if we're going to be overseeing 300 systems per year for 5 years that are going to maybe all need variances from the Board of Health, that means if the Board of Health is meeting 25 times a year, twice a month or something, how long are their meetings going to be? Who's going to be reviewing this? Who's going to be installing? What's the cost if the town does it? And what are the potential costs if we go with the regional plan? And talking about whether we're going to do a wastewater watershed permit or not, or whether the town's going to manage this, we have no idea what's required for the town to manage it, what the options are for the regional to manage it, what the capital costs are, what the ongoing maintenance costs are. And these are the staggering numbers that people are, they're saying, oh, well, we can do these IA systems. Yeah, but if we're doing 300 over 5 years, and is that what we would do under a watershed? Or if you were doing a watershed permit, would we be saying that same 1,500 systems is going to be done over 10 years? I mean, so I'm not sure how to make a decision or what your decision tree is going to be. If the purpose of the watershed permit is to buy you time so that, 1,500 systems in the 2 areas with TMDL, if those 1,500 families have to come up with, $75 million worth of money, that's a lot. And so one of the advantages of going the watershed permit is then you can apply for SRF funding, state revolving funding, and then you can get 25% of the cost paid by the Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund. So to me, this whole next step of this implementation plan needs some gross numbers by what's it going to cost each year over the 5 years to apply this, and what's it going to cost if we do it under a watershed permit on a different period of timing. Because, what's doable is...
I agree. I think from a practical standpoint, there aren't enough people putting in these systems right now on the Cape that we could even get this done. So I think that's another huge factor, is just, are we going to be able to do this in 5 years? I don't really think so, even if we wanted to. So.
Or 7.
Well, based on that, then we absolutely have to do a watershed permit, because that at least stretches out the time.
Right.
So that it's not all forced into a tiny funnel.
Right. On the other hand, we want to clean up the water as soon as we can.
Oh,
So
yeah.
that's the other side.
But there's reality, and there's, what we're shooting for is
Right.
important, but what's reality is, it's physically impossible.
Right. And technology, as I said, is going to keep changing, and hopefully in our favor.
Now, just for an example of timing, so the water is in our backyard. So we started in September investigating, okay, let's get ahead of it. We don't want to pay all the huge money. So first place I called was Bracken Engineering in Bourne. And they told me that if I wanted to give them my email address, they would put me on a waiting list that they would get back to me at the end of November to put me on another waiting list. For the design.
You used a figure of 300 per year. The figures that she put up was 170. And if
No,
you-
that was the second Those were the non-TMDLs. So the TMDLs, the first 5 years was 300 systems per year for 5 years in the areas where we have a TMDL, because that's pretty much how much time we have. Those, if we don't go with a watershed permit, that's what you have to do. That's what has to be done.
That's right.
Okay, and we would have to add, in my opinion, we'd have to have at least 2 more people in order to meet that kind of a criteria,
I mean,
as
it
far
might
as
be more than 2
inspection.
people.
I thought,
Well, I'm just saying, I said a minimum of
Yeah.
2 more
I mean, I
people.
don't know what the testing requirements are. And when you get into this situation of of a watershed permit, where the town is really taking, the onus of the meeting the plan is going on the town then, the town in a way has more leeway for saying we're gonna go with enhanced IA systems, because we're gonna own that it's gonna perform, and if it doesn't, then, something else is gonna happen. So it's a very complex issue, and the town to take this responsibility puts a lot on it. But I think if everyone in town looks at this and says, well, this is going to affect all of us, especially if you're looking at using enhanced IA in Buttermilk Bay, this is, say there's 1,000 parcels that are in the sewer system. 7,000 parcels in town that are not in the sewer system are going to have to contribute to this. And we see all the towns on Cape Cod, I mean, they're all passing 130 million for the Barnstable watershed plan this year, 80 million for the phase 2 of Mashpee. I mean, there's a cost associated for this that we have to start identifying for people so they understand what the cost is, and that we have a best implementation plan. But I don't see that it can be done without a watershed permit. If we're serious, if we're serious about doing it, we could just throw the homeowners to the wolves basically and say, you're on your own, good luck getting the system in.
That's just not
And
fair.
who's gonna
fair.
who's gonna then be responsible in 2031 for going after someone that hasn't done it?
Right.
That's
And
a
what
tradition.
is the town gonna be liable for? We're back to conservation law, like suing the EPA and suing Mass DEP and saying you're not doing enough.
That's been the traditional problem with all planning exercises, is that there's a lot of front-end testing that goes on, and then there's what I'd call an abandonment, where, for the interval, that goes on. There's no, what I'd call interval testing to ensure that the systems are continuing to meet the criteria that was set up to begin with.
So whose decision is this?
Well, right now,
What, for watershed permits?
Yeah. I doubt
No,
it's,
it's a
we're,
town.
we're called the advisory committee, so
well,
we
but
can only
is that part of the
advise.
CWMP, a watershed permit?
So
Or
where the
not?
watershed it is not. And where the watershed permit comes into play is exactly what MJ you said. I knew it was going to be a frighteningly large number. I have the table. I will send it as an attachment. You'll see it with the select board packets that will become available with the report. It is a $15 million per year capital investment for the first 5 years to be able to meet the alternatives that you identified for Finney's Harbor and for McGansett-Squetique. That's not even counting the work that remains to be seen across the remainder of town, which is not required, but as you just mentioned, MJ, it's absolutely encouraged, and it is something that across Cape Cod we have seen the effects of what happens if you don't start doing something, which is
Yeah.
legal repercussions. So having the plan at least spelled out is what I have on a 20-year time frame. So the watershed permit does happen to also be on a 20-year time frame. So there's the potential that it would align nicely with the CWMP timeline. This is the feedback I needed to know so that I can then use that to hear. I thought it was very unreasonable to have $15 million a year in individual investments over the next 5 years. And to hear, again, The table will be provided so you can also fall off your chair and then get back on your chair, which is what I did when I was calculating these numbers. But that helps me to understand exactly what you need to see for direct comparison, because some of these decision points are coming to critical intersections, and you are the ones making this plan for yourselves. My goal is to just give you, as scary as the numbers are, those figures, so that you know what you're looking at. And this session was helpful because there was, while we weren't directly, actively working on the CWMP together in 2023, there was a lot that had changed that will impact now potentially how you can support your community members by coming to the table in reviewing the scary tables that I'm about to send to you.
Yeah, and one of the things that I'm not sure if Wellfleet has figured out how they're doing their SRF or with,
They have not.
you know, like, so Wareham got a $3 million project on the intended use plan for the state revolving fund for their septic system plan in a section. And they've been trying to figure out whether they're going to buy the systems and how they're actually going to do that within that SRF program. And that's another thing that we have to kind of figure out if we're going to do this.
So if I might, two things. One is just to remind everybody that Kate actually sits on the IA committee. So New England Water Environment Association is the wastewater association that looks into designs and associated with sewers and IA and so forth. Kate is on the committee, and the committee consists of engineers, vendors, and others that look at what's going on in the IA community and what's technologies are coming about and what we're learning and so forth. So Kate has a really good handle on the immediate things that are happening. I went to the annual conference this past January, and there was a presentation specifically around IA systems. And the presentation from Wellfleet went through, one of the specific questions I asked was, where do you stand on your SRF program? Because that's of interest to us, obviously. And they indicated that they haven't really figured it out yet. So in theory, when they submitted the project evaluation form for funding, they had this idea of buying the equipment, and then we would sell it to the general populace, and then they would install it. And then it's the devil's in the details. And, you know, they don't even have we don't have easements, so we're not going to be operating it. How do we give a private citizen equipment to install on their property? So there's a whole administrative and detailed policy that they need to put into place before they can even move to that next step. And this is the big challenge, and why I believe that Mass DEP wants communities to enter into the watershed permits, so communities will be responsible, and that's their way of managing nitrogen throughout the Cape Cod, and then it will be incumbent upon the communities to determine how they're going to do it. Either they're going to install sewers, or they're going to go to IA, and they're going to have some kind of institution set up, i.e. a utility, either it be regional or local.
Aside from cleaning up the water, is there any benefit to the 5-year plan?
DEP responsibility, right?
Is it possible
Yes.
the 5-year plan was really put out there to spawn innovative systems developments, to, you know, put a little pressure on the development community?
I think it was more to avoid lawsuit.
CLF.
Yeah,
Yes.
the Conservation Law Foundation was threatening to sue again because there hadn't been enough enough progress by Mass DEP, the same way they originally sued EPA for not enforcing. So, it was really to put pressure on to get things going.
I thought it was to force people to use watershed permits.
Well,
Because the contrast in the two options is so stark that
Well, right. So the difference, so I think the first question that was asked was, what are the positives on the water, on
Other than clean water.
the Title V other than clean water? So the other is that it puts the onus on the homeowner and that it doesn't add administration and costs, so it's just on the individual homeowners. I think we're getting away from what the original goal of the TMDLs were, which was to clean up water holistically for a community, and that the community as a whole has a position to play in that cleanup. And so simply because you're not the first one to put in an IA system, you know, you're going to get the positive results by having cleaner water, even though you don't have any skin in the game, as I would put it, right? So the watershed permits give you more of an opportunity to spread that across the watershed and say, we're managing the watershed holistically, and this is how we're going to do it. And yes, IA systems will have to go in these particular areas because they're highly more sensitive than others. But how do we as a community support each other to make that happen? And so I think that's the real difference between that watershed and the Title V.
I think the other thing, though, particularly for Bourne, is number one, we should be focusing on the Board of Health instituting regulations that all new construction would be a general use or enhanced use IA system. Right from the get-go, let's stop messing around. Anything, you know, and it's going to be mandated anyway, but starting July, but that's the first thing. On the other piece of it, we still have 2 years, right, before we need to have a watershed permit, and it gives us time, you know, because up until then, you know, existing homeowners, if we're not planning on sewering. So if we're planning on doing general use IA systems and an existing homeowner has to redo their system, you know, we can say, you know, in 2 years, you're probably going to have to do a general use IA system. So if you're doing it, you better start doing it now. But in terms of the watershed, the first step is really the CWMP, right? This is what the plan looks like with the CWMP. Correct. So we have to get this plan, and this is what it is, and this is what it's going to cost you. The next step to me after that is to say, if we go to a watershed permit, it allows us to, stretch out those 5 years of 300, maybe it becomes 150 systems a year for 10 years. And so, but not have that as necessarily part of your CWMP, but have it part of your watershed permit. Is that the timing of the way to do it?
That would be, that school of thought is definitely the way to go, because then when you're doing the watershed permit, you can say, now we have this 20-year period, we want to do a pilot of urine diversion facilities, compost, let's do a pilot here, let's get funding for a pilot in this area. Who is interested in being the test cases, we'll get the funding for that or whatever. So that gives you an opportunity to test out and have more time for new solutions as they come up. And frankly, I don't think there's enough contractors out there to do the installation, let alone engineers to do the design, because there's already so much work being done with the infrastructure.
I agree.
Have they, the town of Wellfleet, have they looked at leasing? Because I ran a water heater leasing program at Boston Edison 60 years ago. That allowed the implementation of a water system, water heating system, and yet it didn't put a burden on an individual, on an individual who wanted to acquire that, and you still were able to exercise control, and make the lease into a manageable level of expense.
I'm not, Environmental Partners isn't working on that wealthy project, so I'd have to find out if that's something. They're still trying to figure it out, at last I heard in January.
The concern that I have when we start talking about the moving of the Board of Health to a completely let's say, implementation strategy is what I would consider to be levels, because unless and until it was an absolute thing that everybody had to comply, I'm concerned about an implementation strategy that says some have to do it and some don't. So, how do I get around that? As I write a regulation on, and certainly we're all here because of, let's say, of water safety, water purity, and all of that. And many years ago, when we put together the first wastewater advisory committee at the county, it was all about cleaning up the water. Not to come up with strategies. And I think at that point it was about half of what, about almost 40% of what it would have cost, not what it costs now. As everything goes up, as everything goes up. But at the same time, the state in identifying us, Bonneville County, as the implementation, application, if the Commonwealth accepted it for all on-site systems, I think there might be more support for what I would call the kind of funding delivery that would put everybody in the same boat. Because right now, Barnstable County has been identified as an area that is, let's say, prosperous enough to be able to afford all of these suggestions, and it's not. I mean, let's say, although the town of Bourne has a median, let's say, house value of $750,000, okay, you can look it up. And then, and I was surprised it was actually a more prosperous community than Sandwich, which on paper looks better. But there's more value in this town. But that value would tend, in my opinion, to disintegrate if it's all poured into what I would call the protection of, or the implementation of a wastewater management strategy that doesn't take into account what the county is doing. Because I think the county is on the right track. Okay? However, having said that, if you go up to, if you take a look at the school systems like Cape Tech down in Harwich or the Upper Cape up here, there's that tendency to lose control over the management of what it costs. So the concern that I would have as a taxpayer is, okay, the county certainly moving in the right direction, but what safeguards do we have about what I would call the addition of cost, because it's important to get the job done, as opposed to taking a look at what the affect is on an average taxpayer, on the day-to-day cost. I think that's that's sort of the sticking point in all of this,
Okay,
in my opinion.
Our goal is to get the CWMP done so we can get approval at the November town meeting. So I don't even know where we are now. We've had so many discussions on this.
So the recommended plan right now is what we've presented to you.
Right.
And we have dollars associated with what that would be, and we can have that. That's the next presentation that we'll be having.
Okay.
And I think Kate can speak to it very detailed because she is in this every day. However, the recommended plan is considered conventional, even though it's general use IA, because that's now considered conventional. So when you give this to DEP and say, this is a recommended plan, they know that it's implementable. That if you were to implement it, this would actually reduce the nitrogen that needs to be reduced within the TMDLs, and you will meet your requirements. In addition to that, the recommended plan will speak to the fact that there does need to be a decision made whether to stay with Title V or go ahead with the watershed permit, and give you some general information on the costs associated with that. So that's
Over time.
over time.
Yeah, so that, this is kind of
Correct.
like the Title V looks like this, a watershed permit might look like this, or, you know, if it would change.
Generally speaking, it's, you know, I have to tell you, I mean, let's be realistic. Nobody's ever done anything this big in terms of a regional IA systems holistically for TMDLs, and we can give you costs of what it will be for adding X amount of people and what potentially the utility costs could be, but it's best available guess at this
Yeah.
point.
So, the timeline that you have on the screen, so the reviews by MIPA and the Cape Cod Commission, can they happen quick enough for us to get this on the warrant for a fall town meeting?
So the goal in setting up this timeline is the draft recommended plan will be sent for review by the select board next week, so that it will be included in your packs for the April 9th meeting, if that's what's still on the calendar, as a draft recommended plan. Feedback from the community on that draft plan, which will include those dollar values, will then be applied as part of the MIPA environmental notification form and review. The goal is that the community will have a draft recommended plan throughout the rest of the summer, because the plan that will be reviewed by MIPA and by Cape Cod Commission will still be known as the draft recommended plan. It is not until the public, through the MIPA environmental notification process, which has a public comment period, opens and closes, that then the community incorporates that into the final plan. So the goal is that by having a public hearing through MIPA filed by this June, which means you could have your public hearing in July, we timed it in working with town staff so that you would have peak attendance. The goal was to include seasonal visitors as well as year-round residents, and that's a great time when people are typically in town. To have that peak public comment period, to be able to receive as many comments as possible to incorporate into what then becomes the final recommended plan for select board review and acceptance, and then the select board can choose at that time to put it forth or recommend it to town meeting warrant.
I would say that whether or not it was feasible to have it at the fall town meeting will depend on the number of public comments. Because if there's extensive public comment or questions, if, for example, we have our fall town meeting at the beginning of November, and the warrant closes at latest the beginning of October, that's a pretty tight timeline if there's significant public comment. And so, plus there's figuring out the financial piece of it. You know, what is that? If we have a plan, but we don't have a financial piece decided to it, then we're looking at a capital investment, you know, how that looks on the capital investment and a long-term plan. You're probably looking at not the fall, but next spring. Yeah.
There are 15 towns on Cape Cod. Will we have information from the other 14 towns as far as the kind of questions that they're asking, the kind of implementation strategies that they're suggesting, and the kind of, let's say, difficulties that they're facing? Just sort of in a general way, you know, I have a picture
Everyone
of
else is
a
doing
potential
sewers.
narrative.
Everyone else is doing sewers. I mean, except for a small part of Wellfleet and a small part of, is it Brewster that did some, was it Brewster? I think it's a B town, yeah. Just about every, Mashpee, Orleans, Harwich, Pleasant, Falmouth, everyone's doing sewering. And so that whole plan and that whole discussion is really different.
So why are we not doing it?
Costs.
Why are we not doing sewering?
I mean, do we have some preliminary numbers of what it would cost?
I think the Bourne isn't the same. So if you look at Barnstable, which is a lot built out, you look at Falmouth, which is a lot, very dense, areas. We tend to have areas that are spread out. Take McGann Squatique, that's all, you have all 1 acre lots. You have, Wings Neck is all 2 acre lots. So you have a lot spread out. We don't have, Sandwich has 1/4 acre lots and 1/2 acre lots. We have some really old areas that are small and connected like that. You take Little Gray Gables, it's all connected, like around Circuit Avenue, it's all connected. But as a general plan, it's tons and tons of sewer lines that are super expensive. So, and if you can, with your enhanced IA systems, I mean, we're saying general use, but I think we're gonna try to encourage people to have enhanced IA systems when they're putting them in, which is one of the reasons for going with a watershed permit, because then you get close to the same nitrogen removal as you do for a sewering plant. And I don't know what it would cost to sewer the town of Bourne. It would be immense. because it's
Incredibly
spread out.
expensive,
Right,
Yeah,
right.
not even considering that we're on both sides of a canal.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we kind of went with the IA system seemed to make more sense for us. I think the biggest controversy is going to be the controversy of watershed versus individual homeowner. And if it's going to be the Title V individual homeowner, what can we do to help people? What kind of system? There's the county system, which is, loan system, the septic loan program, which is, gonna be tapped out. I mean, with all the people connecting to sewers and doing septic systems, there's that which pays, can put the cost for a person. So that's what we have to kind of figure out. What's to me, the numbers are gonna tell us the story. And is the town gonna take on some of this responsibility? Are we gonna say, we're gonna create 50% of the, $35 million, say we do half of the cost of the 75 million, and we stretch it over 10 years, like, what does that look like in terms of budget and numbers, and, you really, and then have people look at it and say whether it makes sense. It is an environmental benefit, so there's a lot to be said for people paying. But that regional, I think that some sort of regional septic utility probably makes a lot more sense, but maybe not. Maybe, sewer enterprise expanded for the septic utility is what's gonna make sense, So I think we go ahead with this. See, let's put the numbers in. I don't think we have too much that we can say in terms of a recommendation to the select board. It's more these different people understanding and being able to explain it to their various and sundry committees when it comes to them,
We need to get the files from EP, from environmental partners.
Yeah.
We can do that.
Well, one thing I completely agree on is that we do have to upgrade the IA, let's say, responsibility, and it is on our forecast agenda of things that we're looking at. But my only issue is how to implement it in what I'd call a step stair way, where we have what we apply now, which would be almost in the area of, it'd be a nice thing for you to do, to the absolute part where you will do it. So that seems to be the only sticking point in it, because I see a complete need that we should do it.
And I'm still gonna throw in there, I think we need to include the possibility of other systems. So we're not, because we don't wanna have a CWMP and then we have to break it to, do the watershed program.
Anything that doesn't go into the waste stream is certainly something to look at.
Right.
But I think, and we've had Clevis multrums and things, and things of that sort for a long time. Electric, electric urinals and.
Right, there's
all that
plenty of
other
them,
stuff.
so we have to consider that because of the costs, nothing else.
Cost is hugely
Yeah,
different.
yeah.
I mean, you're talking about 51,000 on the high side.
Right.
A urine reducing toilet is like $2,000
Yeah,
or even
it's
less.
like under 10 for the whole system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it is getting used to a dry system is something that you can't just dismiss in terms of what people are comfortable with and are used to, because that was that has always been what I call the sticking point, especially if you're building on a hillside and the stack from your dry system happens to be going up into the air and the wind is blowing it to your neighbors. You have no idea of what kind of scream level you'll hear.
Have you been talking to my wife?
No.
Okay, given the hour,
Yeah.
Yes, the other thing that we need to finish is reorganizing and electing new officers. We don't, right now, I'm the chair, Chris is the clerk, and we don't have a vice chair. So we really need to reorganize. I'm not sure that I can stay as chair. I have something else big going on. So somebody else could take that on, please. Do I have any volunteers?
I'm already a chair.
Well, we're all busy. I mean, I know that.
I don't mind taking chair, because it's really just organizing meetings.
That'd be wonderful.
So I don't mind doing that.
I think you need to have a nominating committee, a recommendation from a nominating committee, somebody, that would call everybody else and see who was interested in doing it.
I've been trying this for a while, Bill.
Good luck.
Yeah.
and my schedule is so difficult sometimes, but I don't mind doing the minutes, it's just that I need someone that's a second that can able to do them. We'll have the minutes in a few minutes, actually.
I'll make a motion to nominate MJ.
I second. All in favor? Aye. All right. You get it, sweetie. Thank you.
How many was that? 1, 2,
Everybody.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7?
Well, technically, it's supposed to be roll call.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Chris?
Yes,
Marlene, are you on?
Yes.
Thank you. John?
Yes.
Bill?
Yes?
Wayne?
Yes.
I'm a yes. MJ?
Yes.
Keith? Yes.
Yes.
All right.
And Neil?
Neil?
Yes.
Okay.
Motion to adjourn?
No, we still have to find a vice chair.
Oh,
I'm trying.
Let's do clerk next.
Okay, clerk.
So are you willing to continue as clerk, Chris?
yeah, as long as someone's got a good, can help me out when I'm gonna miss a meeting, I'm not gonna be available.
Are these meetings recorded?
Yes.
So you could get the recording, Chris. That would be direct.
remember.
Well, we don't need really
No,
detailed.
all you need is the outcomes. That's the
Yeah.
only thing that has to
I
be in
mean,
a minute.
really, there was a presentation, we can put in the slides of the presentation. There was a motion by Wayne and a second by
Right.
Kathy.
It's votes. that
That,
we have
it's
to put
really
in.
that's really what we need. So I nominate Chris Hilberg for clerk.
I second. Chris?
Where's the roll call?
It's a roll call. Chris, do you accept?
Sorry, my computer died for a second, yes.
Okay, yes. John?
Yes.
Bill?
Yes.
Wayne?
Yes.
I'm a yes. MJ?
Yes.
Keith?
Yes.
Neil?
Yes.
All right.
And Marlene, are you there?
Oh, yes, Marlene.
Yes.
Okay. All right, vice chair. Is anyone willing to take on vice chair to back up MJ?
I'll do it.
Thank you, Keith. All right, I nominate Keith as vice chair.
Second.
Chris?
Yes,
Marlene?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Bill?
Yes.
Wayne?
Yes.
Yes? MJ?
Yes.
Keith?
Yes.
Neil? Yes. Excellent. All right, thank you all.
And Chris, let's work on minutes for the next meeting so we can figure things out.
happy to,
Chairman of the Electrical Engineering Society was a meeting.
Yeah.
The nomination
And I have a
committee
list of the
show
people,
up
so
to-
we can do that. I'm gonna make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second. All in favor? We don't have to do a roll call, do we? No.
Yeah, just do it.
It's your turn.
Oh, am I now chair? Okay.
You are.
Chris,
yes.
Marlene,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Bill,
Aye.
Wayne,
Yes.
Kathy.
Yes.
MJ, yes. Keith,
Yes.
Neil. Meeting adjourned at 5:12.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank